simultaneously, when I started with that real estate agent, literally like within a few weeks of that, even beforehand, I had put out this idea. I'd asked friends, what should I be doing? I'm open to opportunities. And a lot of people kept telling me real estate. And I had friends that were in real estate and various things. And I ended up finding a friend, meeting a friend, again, a coincidence, you may say, but I don't find anything as a coincidence. I think everything is divine providence.
Your network is your net worth. Come listen to some of the most successful people I know share invaluable knowledge, stories, and advice in real estate, business, and beyond. This is Weiss Advice. Whether you want to take your business or personal life to the next level, look no further.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in into another incredible episode of Weiss Advice. I'm your host, Karl Sona. And that's right, I am not Yonah Weiss. So today, for this very special episode, this marks the 300th episode of Weiss Advice. We're doing things a little bit differently here, and we're going to put Yonah in the hot seat, and he's going to have to answer questions from yours truly, Karl Sona. So without further ado, I'd love to bring on our special guest today, Yonah Weiss. Yonah, how are you, buddy?
Awesome, Karl. I'm so excited for the 300th episode and so grateful for you to take the time out of your busy day and, do this together with me. And I think it really means a lot to me because for our listeners who don't know, you may be listening to the podcast and you're like, wow, this is such a great podcast, or you love it, or whatever. And it sounds so smooth and the transitions are great. And no one really knows all the work that goes into producing a podcast. And I think one thing that I felt it was apropos for you, Karl Sona, who is the co-founder of Streamline Podcast, now Streamline Media, who actually does the podcast editing and production of Weiss Advice Podcast and the podcast host for many years yourself, a seasoned veteran in the podcasting space to actually come in and do the interview. So thank you.
Of course. And honestly, the pleasure is all mine. I think this is one of those moments where life just comes together full circle because it's been about 2.5 years since we initially connected.
Right.
You were actually one of our very first clients that had this brilliant idea and was actually courageous enough to take it on. And here you are 2.5 years later, 300 episodes in the can. And I just want to give you kudos, Yonah, because it's truly a testament to all others that are looking to start podcasting as to what can be done when you're willing enough to stay consistent. So let's go back to the beginning of your podcasting journey. Then I actually want to kind of peel the layers back on who you are as a man. 2.5 years ago, what was the goal? I mean, did you see it kind of turning out the way that it's gone?
It's interesting. People ask me, why I started the Weiss Advice podcast and what it's all about. And I said this then, and it still holds true now. I'd been a guest on a couple hundred, probably over 100 podcasts at that point when I got the idea, like, wait, I read this book called, The Best Ever Real Estate Syndication book. And I was really interested in starting my real estate journey as well, along with, doing cost-segregation for many years and being a guest talking about the subject matter. But I really enjoyed the medium and I love having conversations. I love the interview. Like, hey, I want to ask some questions too. And I thought about, in that book, Joe Fairless talks a lot about having what he calls not just a social media presence, but a thought leadership platform. And he talks a lot about having a podcast. And pretty much everyone who read that book went out and started a podcast. And maybe that's the reason why there's so many real estate podcasts out there. But to me, I'm like, hey, I want to start a podcast too. I think it'd be a great idea. I already have a pretty large social media following, already have an audience. Let's do it. And it literally took me about a year from when I had that initial thought and read the book to actually going and launching Weiss Advice Podcast. And the main reason why it took so long was the challenge of, well, how do I actually go about, practically having a podcast? I mean, I can interview people, but then what? And it literally was only until I was introduced to you and your team at Streamline that I was like, okay, now I can do it. Now I have all the pieces to the puzzle. Like I can record, that's fine. But then what? And that's really where you guys come in.
I chuckle because you make it look so easy, man. I mean, 300 episodes on your own show, another 400, probably by the end of the year, this is 2023, January 3rd as we're recording this, you'll probably eclipse 1,000 episodes that you've been on that are out there for people to snack on. And so I guess, where my mind goes is, what does that do for you personally? You're going to be on about 1,000 episodes by the end of this year. What is it that you personally get by showing up and providing this information and telling stories and connecting with hosts out there?
So I literally just thought about this today, not really in connection to us recording this, but just in connection with, so I released another podcast episode that I was a guest on earlier today. And I was thinking to myself, wow, it's like 400 episodes. It's pretty crazy. But to me as a teacher, and this is really my background, you talk about peeling back the layer, being a teacher, you go into the classroom and you go and you sit with a student or whatever it is in any setting. You're not thinking about, oh, I have to teach this again. I have to talk about this again. If you're really passionate, you really love what you do, your mindset is, this is really the first time that I'm teaching this subject. When really it's not, because you have all the experience that goes into teaching this and talking about this subject so many times that it actually becomes more powerful and more, I guess, concise also every single time that you teach it, because you learn new ways to say things. You learn maybe some new jokes to throw in there. And so for me, talking about cost-segregation hundreds of times, to me, it's fascinating because I get better every single time that I do it. And so it's awesome to see some of those earlier episodes, 5 years ago or something, where I was kind of fumbling on it and maybe not saying the right things, to whereas today, it's awesome. So from that perspective, it's been a lot of fun. And I call it like sharpening the saw, right? The 7 habits of highly effective people talks about the 7th habit is sharpening the saw. Is you just get better and better and better every single time you do something over and over again.
Yeah, man. Repetition is the mother of all skill. That is for sure. And I've got a good friend of mine that's a teacher, and he says the best teachers are the ones that can actually learn with their pupils. So I think you're spot on there, buddy. So I hear the passion for cost seg. We're going to talk about exactly what that is for those that may not be aware, because I can appreciate that might be a very niche term. But where did you get your start in real estate? I mean, was there always a passion there? Maybe you can take us back to the early days of how you grew up and what actually attracted you to real estate, specifically cost segregation.
So I only got started in real estate about 7 years ago. And if you can tell from my white beards, I'm already, in my 40s. So really not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. And when I grew up, I didn't really know anything about real estate, nothing about finances. I wasn't given a financial, education. I'm in a pretty, middle-class family. We didn't talk about money at all. And, I was told if I wanted to do something, I had to get a job and pay for it myself. I paid my own way through college and things like that. So I didn't have this kind of silver spoon or whatsoever. And so I had a lot of student debt. I had a lot of loans going through in my life. And really only about, like I said, 7 years, I was a teacher for 15 years or so. And that was really my passion for forever. I taught mostly, and really it changed over the years, but most of my passion was in teaching like Jewish subjects. So things I taught in various schools, like Jewish schools and Jewish like higher education called the yeshiva or a kollel, which is a place where people, post high school and sometimes even post college sit and learn together in group settings. And that's really where my real skill set was. If someone asked me, what's my real skill set, I didn't necessarily learn to become a rabbi per se, where a lot of people do, and they study the texts and they study the law. But I was doing it just really because I loved it and loved to teach. So that was really where my main passion was. But through that, at a certain point, I realized, well, hey, I don't really have much money or any money at that point. A lot of debt.
Not making very much.
Not making much at all.
Relative to the loans.
And exactly, the loans, going up in debt and not really being able to make ends meet. My wife had been a, stay-at-home mom for some time. She'd worked on and off for the years. And, we had 6 kids at the time. And I was like, okay, I need to do something. It's still 6. But okay. It was really after my 6th. Yeah. After my 6th was born, that it really was a wake-up call for me. And I was like, okay, I got to make something happen. I got to really make a change. And so I was really open to opportunity.
Okay.
And when you're open to opportunity, God has the funniest ways of sending things to you, but you just have to open your eyes and you have to be willing.
What does that actually mean though? Because I hear that a lot. And, right now I've got to imagine there's somebody that is stuck in, let's just call it a quote unquote dead end situation where they're capped on their earning potential. There's way more bills than there is month. And hearing from people like, you got to open your eyes. You got to, lean into the discomfort or to the thing that's calling you to actually make that jump. Can you be a little bit more crystal about that? Just curious.
Yeah, there's a lot of, self kind of awareness that comes along with that. But I think being a religious and being a spiritual person, I think I'm just much more aware and of my surroundings and aware of, what's going on in my life. And so when you kind of take a step back and take a really accounting of your life and accounting of your daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it is, you look and say, okay, what are the things that I'm doing that are helping me get to whatever goals that I have. And I think goal setting is an important thing to do. It really kind of helps you frame that. But at a certain point, what I mean when I said when you're open your eyes to opportunity and you have to, you recognize the opportunity comes, when you put yourself out there, I think everyone recognizes this and people call it different things. You don't have to be a religious person to, call it God, whatever people call the universe or karma or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Everyone realizes that the energy that you put out in the world, or that is what comes back to you. And, Think and Grow Rich, you can read all these books that talk about this kind of thing. When you're thinking about the right thing, you kind of manifest your reality. And so when you think about, wanting to be open for opportunities, then your eyes open up to seeing things that you wouldn't have necessarily seen before. And it was so true. I literally, read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People about 7-8 years ago. And that was the first business book that I ever read. And I read this thing about synergy and I was like opening my eye to it. And right at that time when I was looking for opportunities, I was like, wow, synergy, this is great. I love this idea, this concept. And then I saw an ad for a real estate company called Synergy Real Estate. And I was like, I said, I'm going to call this guy. I'm just going to call this guy because that to me, that was like a sign, if you will. And I was like, and I don't believe in signs, so to speak, like that, like, oh, this is something I have to do. I was like, okay, this is obviously God showing me something that I need to take action on. And so I called up the guy and literally ended up becoming a real estate agent under this guy. And we ended up becoming partners. And it was a great kind of introduction into my real estate journey at that time. So that was a funny story, but again, just kind of an example of opening your eyes to something, but educating yourself at the same time.
Without question. I love how you bring the spiritual aspect into it. I'm also a very spiritual person. I believe in God, and I truly believe that when we ask him for things and we're willing to go to the quiet depths of ourselves, whether that be actual physical silence or time in prayer, meditation, you start to get downloads. And there comes a point in time where you can't just chalk it up as, oh, that was a coincidence. Right? Surely be. It's like, no, you've actually been asking for this. Be receptive, put your antennas up and receive, and then be willing to act by faith, not by sight, to see where that path might take you. And look at you here today, 7 years later, and almost 800 episodes in. Weiss Advice, everybody. I love that, Yonah. So you got in as a real estate agent. At what point did you discover cost segregation? And can you give the audience, a very third grade elementary sort of explanation of what cost segregation is and how it helps investors?
So simultaneously, when I started with that real estate agent, literally like within a few weeks of that, even beforehand, I had put out this idea. I'd asked friends, what should I be doing? I'm open to opportunities. And a lot of people kept telling me real estate. And I had friends that were in real estate and various things. And I ended up finding a friend, meeting a friend, again, a coincidence, you may say, but I don't find anything as a coincidence. I think everything is divine providence. And I met a friend of mine in the parking lot one day, and he said, he was a commercial mortgage broker. And I didn't know anything about what that meant. Again, I had no finance background. I had no, math. It was really not my thing. And I ended up speaking with him, and he told me I should come, work with him. And he would teach me everything I need to know about commercial real estate. I was like, okay, great. So simultaneously, I was like moonlighting, doing the commercial mortgages and this real estate brokerage with the synergy simultaneously. And so I was just learning at that point. I was apprenticing. And it was only a couple of years later that I, was again open to opportunities and found this company, Madison Commercial Real Estate, who Madison Specs, which is one of the branches, which is the largest national cost segregation company. And they were looking to hire someone for, business development and sales. And I was interested, although I never really had any experience with sales or anything like that, but I was a teacher and I understood that this was something that could be applied to that. And it opened it up. And so that was, going a little about 5 years ago now. And it's just incredible to see, and I'll get to explain what cost segregation is in a second, but it's just incredible to see how using teaching and education in sales. And that's something I learned early on from like Gary Vaynerchuk and marketing and stuff like that, is that when you become the teacher and you teach people and educate people about what something is, and then when they need that exact service, they're going back to the person who told them everything they know about the subject. They're going to come to you. And so you're not necessarily positioning yourself as, a salesperson. You're positioning yourself as someone who's adding value. And with that added value comes, if you have a business that supports that, it's a great combination.
Without question, you're becoming a trusted expert, a trusted authority.
Exactly.
Naturally, they want to come to say, hey, here's some money if you can help me solve the problem and get to my intended state.
100%.
Perfect. So for somebody that doesn't really understand that they've got a problem that cost segregation can solve, I want to come back to exactly what cost seg is and how it can help investors, right? Because that's primarily who listens to Weiss Advice, get to where they're trying to go ultimately. What is it?
So it's a really weird name for a tax deduction that is accelerated depreciation. So it's an advanced form of depreciation. And if you own a property besides for your primary residence, you get this allowance called depreciation deduction, which essentially lowers your income tax liability by a small amount every single year. So it's based on the principle that things go down in value as time goes on, even though I say it's based on the principle because it's not intrinsic to the actual property, meaning your depreciation deduction starts the day that you buy the property, and it's based on your purchase price. So the IRS is essentially saying if you buy a property for $1 million today in 2023, you can now deduct the entire amount of that $1 million over a 27.5 or 39-year period, right? So you get to take a little bit, 2 to 3% of that every single year, regardless. And if someone else buys the same property a year later for $2 million, they're able to start their 27 years over from brand new based on, and they're allowed to deduct $2 million. So again, it's not based on the intrinsic of the property's value going down. It's based on this kind of made up thing that you can depreciate the value that you spent. Okay, so that's what depreciation is. Cost segregation is just an advanced form of that. It's saying that we're going to break down the property into its components. And certain components of the property, like personal property, furniture, equipment, fixtures, carpeting, cabinets, all that stuff actually depreciates, quote unquote, faster. And you can take the value of those items as a deduction at a faster rate over a 5-year schedule. And so what we're doing from a cost segregation engineering service is identifying what all those items are in a property and creating a new depreciation schedule showing you how much you can actually deduct at a faster rate. So in a nutshell, it's a cash flow mechanism, a tool that allows you to reduce your tax liability by getting more deductions upfront.
Love it. Love it. So I'm a limited partner in some deals. Let's talk to limited partners for a second. What are the advantages for someone like me? Can I take those paper losses to offset my earned income or income coming from other streams, let's say my business? Or how does it specifically help a limited partner who isn't, let's say, full-time or recognized as a full-time real estate professional?
Yeah. So real estate professional is a huge topic in itself. We've talked about this many, many times. I'm not going to go into that, but a limited partner who is not a real estate professional is limited to just using those deductions to offset their rental or their property income. And so it's important to make that distinction because a lot of people think, oh, I can become a limited partner. I can invest in real estate passively and then just use all those deductions to offset my W-2 income. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I know some people sell it like that, like it is. It's not. But you can use, and as a limited partner, you're going to be allocated your depreciation deductions according to your percentage of ownership of the property. And you'll get that on what's called a K-1 tax form. And you are able to use those deductions against any of your other rental or passive income. And so that's a huge benefit that limited partners have, is that here's real estate, a asset class that you're allowed to invest in, get returns from, and essentially, if they're doing cost segregation, pay no taxes on that income. And so I don't know of any other investment, type that you can actually get return on your income and also have it be tax-free.
Yeah. No, that's one of the things that always attracted me about it. When I had a W-2 job, I was, kind of a high wage earner, wage earner. And I was always trying to find ways to just kind of find a little shelter to kind of duck and hide underneath. And that's how it was positioned to me. But what I failed to realize is what you explained about how LPs can't leverage that against that earned income. But there are some nice advantages there, as you mentioned. So I'm curious, Yonah, this is a new year. What's new, if anything, in the space of cost seg, that GPs should be familiar with, that, deal sponsors should be familiar with to really just have the deals pencil out a lot better on paper?
I think there was this thing called 100% bonus depreciation, which had been around since 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so that allows you to take 100% of your tax deductions from this accelerated depreciation in the first year. And that was a huge benefit for a lot of people for years. Literally allowed you to take this big lump sum. So in 2023, the law changed. Well, it didn't change now, but it was set in the books to start to sunset and phase out by 20% each year. So this year, 2023, is going to be 80% bonus depreciation, which means you're only going to take 80% of those accelerated deductions in the first year. Still great, still awesome. but the remaining 20% can still be spread out over those faster 5 and 15-year schedules. So it's still going to be beneficial. That's the biggest difference, I think, that's happening right now with cost segregation. Another big difference happening, I think, where everyone is experiencing is what, kind of the turbulence that's going on with interest rates and people finding it harder to make deals pencil out. But, we may see that change. I'm really excited to see where the real estate market is headed in 2023.
I love it. Let's take a little bit of a detour before we kind of bring this thing home, if that's okay. So we touched on faith and spirituality a bit earlier. You identify as Jewish Orthodox. Is that correct?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, there are so many branches of Judaism. I think if I would, generally speaking, it's, Orthodox or Hasidic is kind of the branch that I would belong to.
Beautiful. So how, if any, or how does that affect, if at all, the way you conduct business? I'm just curious. And I don't know if that's an off-base question, but I've kind of had this, let's call it a stereotype. All right. Let's just call it what it is, that, Orthodox Jewish people just don't really do business with the secular world. I used to do a lot of business out in parts of Brooklyn, and I would see a lot of the Orthodox Jewish folks that own a lot of the property in the neighborhood, kind of just keeping to themselves. And so I somewhere along the way, I was like, I guess they just don't, mess with people like me. Is that the case? And if not, or if it is, can you just shed some light, for the listeners out there as to how your faith and your religion plays, a foothold into how you do business?
Sure. So a really two-part question there. I mean, how my faith plays a role, but also what the Jewish kind of Orthodox Hasidic kind of view of the outside world, if you will. And it's true. A lot of the Jewish community is very insular, and a lot of them, one of the reasons why a lot of Jewish business people and real estate excel is because of that insular community. And, people do business with each other. They support each other, and they support their own institutions, and they support, if you're going to hire, a cleaning person, right, you're going to look first to, one of your neighbors or someone who is local. If you're going to go to a butcher, you're going to find someone, local, et cetera. And there's a lot of rules and laws within Judaism that kind of express, how we can do business transactions. And there's a tremendous amount of laws about being honest in business in terms of how to measure properly. So many different things, being honest in business measures. So that's one thing that I think is insular. However, it's definitely not limited. I mean, there are plenty of people who are, have branched out and are, doing business with the whole world. And I think I may be on social media a little bit of what's called a disruption, because I don't necessarily talk like a lot of people from Brooklyn.
Right.
Even though I may look like them. And so it's really interesting kind of paradigm that people have mentioned to me, literally hundreds of times. I've gotten this, especially when I had this, Bigger Pockets YouTube interview last year, where, seen by 100,000 plus people. And I have so many people reaching out to me, just, wow, amazing. Someone like you has such a good English, et cetera. Yeah. It's funny, but, really going back to how it affects, just the individual. And I think being Jewish and being religious has a tremendous effect on how I conduct business. Now, one, I'm just practically speaking, there are certain, I don't work on, from Friday, afternoon until Saturday night. Like, we take off, there are many, many holidays throughout the year. We're just completely take off. No email, no phone, no nothing.
Great work-life balance.
It is. It's kind of forced, and not forced in a bad way, but it's, we're put in a position where we understand what the values are, and we know we have to unplug, and we know that this is really what, it's what God kind of how created the world, like set it up that way. On 6 days you work, 7th day you rest. Like, it's part of, and just living with, I guess, congruent, I think is probably the best word, just in homeostasis with the universe and with creation, and realizing that, we're created for a certain purpose, following God's directives. In doing that aligns us and makes us, be successful. And we are happy in doing so. And I think how I relate to people in the business world, by adding value and just trying to help people, which is really where my foundation is. It all comes from that, all comes from those values. And so to me, it's very integral, to the way that I conduct business of, being the religious life I lead also.
I love it, man. Thank you for going there with us and with our listeners for a little bit. You always hear you don't want to really talk about religion or politics. And I'm like, no, I'm going to disrupt that. I appreciate you for also being a disruptor, because I think it's something that can allow us to have a greater understanding of where others are coming from. And that ultimately is what brings unity and better connectivity to the forefront, something that I think our world so desperately needs. So thank you, Yonah. Let's go into our final four, if that's okay. So this is something that obviously you're well familiar with that we like to do here in Weiss Advice. We've got 4 questions that we ask every single guest. And so, of course, Yonah's no exception to the rule that we want to get on awesome sound bites for you guys, okay? So, Yonah, if you don't mind humoring me, I would love to know for the first question, what is the worst job that you've ever had the pleasure of performing?
What's funny is if anyone can go back and listen to early on the podcast, I actually uploaded, and it's probably, I think, the least listened to episode. All the solo episodes I did are like the least listened to episodes. But I did one where I just answered these final 4 questions. I don't remember, it was a couple of years ago, so I don't remember what I said then. But I would say now, just kind of thinking about it, probably the worst job I ever had was when I was in college. I had a summer job working for a magazine as a salesperson. Okay. A salesperson for like advertising, right? You're selling advertising for this magazine. Yep. And no, it wasn't door to door. It was all like phone, like cold calling and stuff like that. And, the cold calling wasn't the worst part of it, although I despise that. But the worst part of it was the like kind of toxic environment of the people in that office. It was just something to me that I'd never experienced before. And people that were, some people that were just like, they're yelling on the phone, and they got off the phone just yelling, how could this person do it? And I was like, and when they made a sale, they were like up and they were ecstatic. And then when they didn't get the sale, they were kind of depressed. And to me, I was like, wow, that's not a life I would ever want to live. Like, this is not something I want to do. I've worked there for probably like 7 weeks or so. And that was enough for me to know boiler room, like sales, is not the place I ever want to be in.
Not going to be it. At least it was a short stint.
Yeah.
What's one book that you read recently that created, I guess you could say, a paradigm shift for you?
Sure. Most recently, I actually read the book, or listened to, I should say, Who Not How, which is an incredible book. A lot of people on my podcast actually mentioned it. And the amazing thing about having this podcast and hearing all of the books that other people say that have given them paradigm shifts has given me a great reading list. And actually recently, a few weeks ago, I actually published publicly that whole list for people to check out. If you want to check out that list, let me know. It's on my LinkedIn. I put it on Twitter also, I think, on a thread. All the top 10 books that were mentioned on the show. For me, Who Not How was one of those books that was mentioned over and over and over again. And I just had to listen to it. And what that's done for me is really opened me up to the idea that I don't need to do stuff on my own. Like, I'm kind of controlling in the fact that I want to see something get done, and I want to make sure that it gets done. And if I oversee it and I do it, like, I know it's going to get done right.
Yeah.
But really, freeing yourself up and freeing your time up is really the key to entrepreneurship and the key to life. Having free time. I mean, you can speak to this more than anyone else, I'm sure, Karl.
Yeah. I mean, it even says so in the Bible at the end of the day. And I'll make sure we have a link to both that list that Yonah published as well as Who Not How down in the notes below this episode for the audience. What would you say is like an important skill set that you've prioritized learning that has helped you in your career, maybe just in life in general?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing that I'm always trying to get better at is social media. And what's funny is that people look at me like, oh, this social media LinkedIn guru, and he really knows everything. But the truth is, because I'm a teacher, I'm a constant learner also. So I'm always trying to get better. And when I see other people who excel at something, I want to, replicate that, and I want to try to learn from them and see what they're doing. So I'm always tweaking and always kind of upping that game. So that's something that literally a month ago, I started using Twitter for the first time ever. And I've just been impressed by like the real estate kind of game. I stayed very, very far away from any of the politics or any of that stuff that's really divisive there, which has kept me away for all these years. But right now, the real estate world there is really opened up a whole new world to me. And so that's one thing I'm going to, Twitter specifically in the social media aspect, trying to get better at.
I love it, man. I love it. And last but not least, how would you define success for you?
So to me, it's always been how you can help more people. Like, the more people I can help, the more successful I am. And I've mentioned this on many podcasts before, but the acronym HOPE, help one person every day. And that's something that really, if you just go out of your way, whether it's making connections, and I love to just make introductions and make connections between people, that's something so easy to do, especially when you expand your network, you meet more people, you automatically think, oh, this person can connect with that person. And when you're not thinking about how I can be compensated for that, and rather you're thinking about how can I just add value and how can I help someone, you're going to get it back 10, 100-fold, literally. And I've seen that more over and over and over in my life. And I attribute all my success, obviously to God, but the fact that just living by this principle of not thinking about yourself, but rather thinking about other people and trying to help other people.
Well, that's brilliant, Yonah. And it certainly goes to show, you wouldn't have made it this far, several hundred episodes in, if you didn't actually embody that. So I encourage you, and I look forward to the next 700. And I want to thank each and every one of you for supporting Weiss Advice. This has been such a great program. It obviously brings about so much value to each and every one of us. And I want the audience to remember that the best answers come only when you ask the right questions. So with that, we're going to sign off, and we'll see you next week. Hopefully, Yonah will be back in the driver's seat, and we look forward to speaking with you all soon. Thank you.
It. Thank you again, Karl. It's been awesome.
You got it.
Real quick, I have one question for you. Did you like this episode? If you did, I want to ask you a huge favor. See, the biggest thing that helps this podcast grow and that will spread this message to the whole world is that if you leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the podcast. What that does is it basically tells the platforms that this podcast is out on is that you like my stuff and I'm doing something right. So take a few seconds out of your day, hit that subscribe button, leave a rating or review. I would be extremely grateful. Also, I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear some feedback. If you have any questions for future episodes, please find me on LinkedIn. Send me a DM, a connection request, Yonah Weiss, and I'd love to hear from you.